Hey everyone, it's Scott Rustrolls here for the June 8th Listen and Learn podcast. Thank you as always for tuning in. Only going to focus on James Comey's testimony today because that's a big story in and of itself. I think the 30,000 foot high picture of this is that James Comey's testimony today did not change anyone's views. If you hated Trump yesterday, you're still going to hate him today. If you think there's nothing to this Russia story, you're still going to think there's nothing to the Russia story today. So in a sense, that's, I think, a win for the president because Comey did not land any kind of knockout punches. He refused to say that he thought Trump committed obstruction of justice, which would have been a really bad headline for the administration, and didn't give too much for the impeachment groupies to really hang their hats on. You know, if you look through the points, actually, I think there's quite a few questions you have to ask about James Comey. So, essentially, Comey's entire argument is that Trump said these things to me that I documented. I never shared these documents with Congress, never shared my concerns with Congress. But now that I've been fired, I'm talking about it now, and you should take me at my word. So it's really a he said between Trump and Comey. You don't know whether did Trump ask for loyalty? Comey says no. Trump says yes. Did Comey get told by Trump to let the Flynn thing go? Comey says yes, Trump says no. And at the end of the day, we will never know. You have two different men who are the only people in the room, which again, yesterday is why I emphasized the president really has to be careful, and Comey is right on this, being in the room one-on-one with people, because it leaves you in this dangerous situation where someone can maliciously make things up about you, theoretically, and you have no real way to defend yourself. But the issues I take in what Comey said, first of all, Comey in 2004, when he was Assistant Attorney General in the Bush administration, wrote a letter of resignation and threatened to resign over a policy disagreement with Bush. So here's a guy who, when he's troubled by something, rightly or wrongly troubled, but if he feels troubled, he stood up and said, I'm not going to work here anymore, and Bush changed policies to keep Comey around. So we're supposed to believe that he was deeply disturbed by Flynn, yet he didn't feel a need to resign this go-round. That's kind of weird. If he was so troubled by what Trump said, why didn't he make a stink? Why didn't he point to Congress? Or, I think, why did he not, in the ensuing days or weeks, contact the White House and say, you got to talk to the president that this is not something he can do with me? He was entirely silenced for weeks. And that's, given his past history of being quite public in his disagreements, that just doesn't fit as to, makes me wonder if he was not so concerned at the time. And he's more retrospectively, now that he's lost his job, trying to cause a bit of a pain in the ass for the Trump administration. And furthering that, you had, after he got fired, the New York Times, a source close to Comey, finding all these memos of which are still not been turned over to Congress. Well, Comey today admits that he was the leaker. So he gave his memos to a friend who gave it to the New York Times in an effort to put political pressure on the Trump administration. But I think you have to look at these documents are arguably government material because they were written by a man in the government. So you have a guy who is leaking, not classified, but confidential government memos to the public. And perhaps it's no wonder why Comey's FBI has not been able to crack down on leakers when he himself is actually doing some leaking. So that's really quite unseemly, to say the least, and speaks to an FBI director who is trying to cause political damage on the president. And as we discussed yesterday, when you consider the fact that he 3 times told the president that the president is not under investigation, and then refuses consistently to tell the public that the president is not under investigation, creating political pressure on the president as the media and Democrats insinuate that he is, it feels like Comey may have had a political motive to his behavior over the past 4 months, which does, in his he said battle between Comey and Trump, have to shade your perspective of whether or not Comey is really a fair and independent witness to what has happened. But Comey again said that Trump is not under investigation as of May 9th when he was fired. That he said that refused to dispute Senator Feinstein's account at the time that there's been not a shred of evidence that ties Trump to any collusion with Russia. He also said, and this is pretty significant, that the New York Times story in February that said there were all these covert contacts between the Trump campaign and the Russians was almost entirely false. So this sensational New York Times story based on supposed classified information turns out basically to be a bunch of hogwash. And basically, Comey is calling the New York Times fake news. It's as simple as that. And Senator Rubio brought up quite a good point of, it's interesting, you have all of these leaks over the past 3 months and these negative Russia headlines, but no one ever seemed to leak the fact that the president was not under investigation himself. You essentially only have bad leaks, never any of the good leaks. And it again furthers the sense that you have a politically motivated portion of the intelligence community and perhaps the political community that is aware of and has classification clearance for what's going on in this investigation, and it's primarily aimed at hurting Trump. And that's why when I hear these statements, there's so much smoke, but we're not finding any fire yet, is to explain what's going on. The reason why there is so much smoke is because media, Democrats, and Obama holdover leakers are blowing smoke around to each other, cross-reporting and blowing these stories up, and not looking at any of the other facts, which continue to be that the president is not under investigation and that there's not a shred of evidence of any collusion between the Trump himself, his campaign, and the Russians. And in fact, Comey again said today that Trump urged him to get to the bottom of this investigation, which is not the behavior of a guy who's worried about there being collusion. And that's why the Democrats have moved the ball from Russian collusion to obstruction of justice. But I have to say, if you think, whether you like the president or you dislike the president, the fact of the matter is the man is not subtle. And we're supposed to believe that if Trump really wanted the Flynn investigation to stop, that all he would have done is say, I hope you do something, and never bring it up again, even in passing. That's not the kind of guy that Trump is. He is an over-the-top, assertive person. So, I think that has to be kept in perspective. And like Senator Risch noted, not a single person has ever been charged of a crime for hoping something. So even if he did say, I hope this Flynn thing isn't too big of a deal, that's not a direct order. Comey at the time was, if he was so concerned about it, again, I ask why he didn't bring it up to his superiors or explain why it was inappropriate, especially given his history of doing just that. And you're left with saying that now that he's fired, he's got some sour grapes and he's trying to cause some political problems. The more interesting story, frankly, was him saying that he only started to document his conversations with this president and not past presidents because he never felt that there were issues with previous ones. Yet he says, a couple sentences later, that Loretta Lynch tried to force him to downplay the Clinton investigation into just calling it a matter, which was the campaign statement suggesting some kind of coordination between the Obama DOJ and the Clinton campaign, which would be completely illicit. And you don't see Comey doing anything about that. And it gets to this point that we seem to be holding Trump to an effort to cause political damage, whereas you don't see that for past years. And it all just calls into question whether or not Comey was trying to exert political pressure over the White House to at the least keep his job and at the worst cause a political problem to undermine the Trump agenda, which speaks to the fact that it was arguably Comey and not Trump who was the one who was politicizing law enforcement and politicizing the FBI. So again, you have Comey failing to provide any evidence for Russia collusion, which is really the big deal here, and you still don't have enough to even get close to arguing obstruction of justice. You don't have, you need Comey at the time raising some more red flags. You need some actually kind of direct order, and not Comey saying, "Well, I kind of interpreted it this way in this uncharitable fashion because I don't like the guy, and then when I'm out of the job, I am working directly to undermine him by leaking government documents." To the New York Times, which you cannot have the top of law enforcement do if you want to enforce anti-leaking laws down on subordinates. That's just unacceptable behavior and speaks to a political agenda that James Comey has that does undermine his integrity as a fair and independent witness. So those are really my takeaways. I was also really glad to see the Republicans in the Senate stand behind Trump. I think this is a unified party that sees the Russia story for what it is, an effort to undermine the Republican agenda because the media and the Democrats have a true hatred for the president, and that's what's really this is motivated by. So that was my thoughts. Please, if you have different thoughts, provide them in the comments below. We'd also appreciate any if you subscribe to the podcast, as well as share with any friends or family you think may be interested in it. Have a great night, everyone.